And they oftentimes, families might start with us, and they may continue with us through school age, but it's really the partnership between all of the agencies that support families and children. And certainly when you're talking about early intervention, you're talking about family-centered practice, and then they turn 3, and they go from what was an IFSP to IEP, and it becomes about school and accessing the curriculum. And so it really does change in many ways. So I'm going to talk to you about CVI and the IEP. My wish, my dream, Commissioner Singer, is that every child in Massachusetts who has an IEP and is associated with Mass Commission for the Blind had an MCD worker sitting at their table, helping that family advocate. Because quite frankly, families are overwhelmed. They don't always have the resources. I realize they need to be invited. If we can help make that happen, I would really love to do that. We work as part of community programs with every child, as Brenda had said, who's blind or visually impaired and has a visual condition, is associated with early intervention. That's a must for Perkins. In addition to that, and we work with about 200 babies per month, just to sort of give you a sense, and the majority of them have CVI, and in addition to that, have additional disabilities. Beyond that, children go from an IFSP to an IEP. Perkins is working right now in 80 cities and towns in Massachusetts with 400 school-aged kids, 3 to 22. And we're doing that work itinerantly. So we're not there all the time. And our job is to teach others so that in our absence, that work continues to happen. I saw a slide recently that showed a circle of a child's life in their waking hours and their sleep hours. And the little tiny sliver of time where we're going in and offering interventions, whether it's through early intervention and infant toddler services or through school age, the more we can help everyone else who's a part of that child's life, which is what I think Colin's team was doing. The more we can do that, the better off, the more likely those interventions will make a difference in the long run for children. So this is, I should have renamed it Alphabet Soup, because I think this is the only field that has as many acronyms in it as we do. And so I hope that it's all very clear. So I'm going to sort of read sideways. In terms of IEPs, I hope the information you take away is helpful not just for the children that you work with who have cortical visual impairment, but that this information applies for any child who has an IEP. And so there are 3 phases to an IEP, and the first process is eligibility determination. When a child goes from early intervention and a referral is made to school, some children we think, isn't that obvious? Of course they're eligible. But it's still procedurally something that the team and the district need to go through. So eligibility determination. The second part of the IEP is actually the development of the plan. And you know, if you could just always remember, and I'm sure you do, and two parts to this, you know, parents all of a sudden are part of a club they never would have elected to have joined. And that if the more we can inform parents and educate parents, the better kids are. No one on that child's team or in that child's life has a more long-term vested interest in the outcomes related to them, I would say, than family or parents. And so the last part of the IEP process is placement. In order to be found eligible, it's, in my mind, a 2-part question. One, the child has a disability, and that disability impacts access to the curriculum. I've provided a link within the slide that is a resource from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education around an IEP process guide. So if you don't, it's a rather lengthy document. If you don't have it, I would suggest you get it, and I certainly would share it with families that you work with. Assessment drives instruction. This is kind of a key word. We hear this a lot in gen ed, we hear it a lot in special ed. But according to the regulations, the assessments are required in all areas of suspected disability. And I've provided the regulation at the bottom. And so when you think about a child with CVI, what might be some of the assessments that will drive instruction? And again, you've heard all of this language here today, but it's really more of the same. Functional vision, a learning media assessment. In Massachusetts, there is a Braille law. Every child is actually thought to be a Braille reader unless determined otherwise, and that is through a learning media assessment. Now, it's interesting. I can't tell you how many school districts I tell that to, and they go, what? I didn't think it was a Braille law in Massachusetts. A low vision evaluation, although it's not required, I would say best practices, particularly when we're talking about this population. And I'd love to put a plug in for Derek and Dr. Graham, because they really do provide an incredibly integrated approach around a low vision evaluation. And during lunch, I was so pleased when I walked out and I saw a teacher that I work with who was coming in and he was saying, he's 5 or 6, that he had an appointment at the eye doctor's today. And so here he was with his mom and his TBI going over. And that's the kind of comprehensive integrated approach that we're talking about. Christine Roman's CVI range, orientation mobility evaluation if appropriate, cognitive testing around function, and other related services. It's interesting, when they make a referral from an IFSP, they're referring the child to a school district, and they're checking off the boxes of these, we all in the vision world fall under other. TBI evals aren't often listed in the other evals or orientation mobility. Yes?
For somebody with a cognitive ability related to CVI, is that something different that someone would recognize to, say, a developmental disability? I mean, if somebody has a cognitive impairment and they're a young child like that, how do you discern whether it's due to CVI or an additional learning disability?
That's where I think the team process, and the TBI helping formulate that. Because it's absolutely true. I mean, what is the test about? What are we actually testing?
Okay, just one piece that I would perhaps add to that, which should go under common sense, go under orientation and mobility, but we know common sense is so common, is an environmental evaluation for a child, even if they are not a candidate for orientation and mobility at the time, to make sure that the environment is user-friendly for that child.
Absolutely. In fact, Vision Services for Massachusetts 0 to 3, it's just really TBI services. That's the partnership that we have with the Department of Public Health. And so if we're working with a child in a community where we know orientation mobility has been difficult in the past, and we know where those places are, we will do what's known as a Let's Move consult to sort of give the team some resources to get started, but absolutely around the environmental eval. Yes?
Which member of the team typically does the technology evaluation?
A technology eval?
Assistive technology?
Assistive technology? So that's interesting. I remember when I was graduating from UMass Boston, someone who was working with the Carroll Center said, so Terry, you have to decide, you're going to be a TBI, you're going to do AT, because the field keeps changing. We provide assistive technology evals. There are other agencies that also provide them. I'm thinking more generally around visual impairment itself. I think a TBI who can perform that eval is particularly helpful because they understand the vision component. Does that make sense? Things to remember. So, and this is an area where I think as a field, we really could do a much better job in. So according to IDEA, the evaluation procedures must be conducted in the child's native language or other mode of communication so that accurate information is provided around that child. We want the test to be about the child, not around the language. And I know, now this isn't just vision. I think this goes across all parts of our field. This is an area where we could do a better job. Who is a member of a child's IEP team? You probably know this already. First and foremost, parents are members of the team. Regulations state 1 regular ed, 1 special ed, a representative from the public agency, someone who's able to provide and supervise specially designed instruction. When I think of that, I think of teachers with vision impaired. But I also think of the public agency piece. I've been in many team meetings where someone might say, I'm sorry, we're going to have to get back to you on that. I have to check with the sped director first and see if we can get that approved. Actually, according to the regulations, someone is supposed to be present who understands what the local resources are. Someone who can make those kinds of decisions. Because it's truly a team process. It's not a top-down model. It doesn't happen out of central office. So someone knowledgeable about public resources. Someone able to interpret the test results, and that can certainly, someone in this process can have a dual role. They can be both a regular ed or a special ed and be an interpreter of test results. Someone who has special expertise. The child, when appropriate, at age 14. Children can be invited earlier than that, certainly. And also anyone else the parents choose to invite to come into the room. What happens if a child is not found eligible? If a child is not found eligible, the team would have a conversation around a 504 versus an IEP. As you know, a 504 is just accommodations. A 504, in my opinion, does not have the same protections as an IEP, particularly if you are a parent. It does not have progress reports associated with it. An IEP, there's consent that families give. There's a lot more participation in the process of an IEP versus a 504, and not reimbursable under circuit breaker. And I'm not, I was sharing with Doretta, we were talking at lunch today, we're running into some districts who are putting children on 504s, and it's really inappropriate. These children require specially designed instruction, and when we're talking specially designed instruction, you're talking TVI services, oftentimes direct, and I'm really very surprised by it. It's been very challenging. And does it have disability? Yes. Does it impact access? The district may say, no, it doesn't. So they get a 504 versus an IEP. So that's how the flow chart works.
Doesn't it say the child making effective progress? It's not access. I think that would be better if it was access, but it's really saying the two questions opposed to, they're connected under the federal law, but they're not connected in Massachusetts. So it says, does the child have a disability in one or more of these areas? Is the child making effective progress? If the child could be totally blind and getting all A's and not eligible according to the flow chart, which is ridiculous.
And I would say that's illegal, right? Like, in my mind, that doesn't seem right. Yeah. It's interesting, we were dealing with one particular district where a brother and sister both have Stargardt's. And the daughter was diagnosed first and the son was diagnosed later, and he actually, his vision was actually worse. And the district decided to put them on a 504 versus an IEP. The district also made some other large mistakes, in my opinion. They sort of put the cart before the horse. They had really good intentions. I don't want it to sound like I'm bashing districts, because I'm a member of a district myself. But they had really good intentions. So they had an assistive technology eval prior to the TBI being involved, and they ordered a gaggle worth of equipment for the sister. And then they passed it on to the brother. They make mistakes like that. There's sometimes the district needs education in addition to everyone else.
Also, going on with the 504 plan is a lot of times the district will go to a 504 plan without even doing evaluations. And you can't go to a 504 and not found, you have to be found not eligible and do the evaluations first, and then the team can say, I don't want it, but you still need the IEP process.
You do, and you have to help parents understand what their due process rights are and give them the information so that they can push that. Because I think sometimes as teachers, certainly as agencies, we try to push that as much as possible. We try to give information, but no one is really more powerful on that team than parents. So educating parents, in my mind, is the best investment that we can make. The components of the IEP, each IEP contains an area for parents to state their concerns or student concerns. There's an area to talk about student strengths and what the key evaluation results are. There's a vision statement that's written by the team. Cautionary note, if you're working with a family who's going from an IFSP to an IEP, there are no stay put rights on that first time through. You should find something in that plan that you can agree with. Everyone knows what stay put is, right? So when a parent rejects portions of the IEP, they put into stay put. They stay with what was previously decided upon and agreed upon while the due process works itself out. When you're going from an IFSP to an IEP, you have nothing to stay put on. You're under a different model.
And the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education does not get a red flag if you do not agree. If you reject an IEP in total, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education do not get any portion or no information regarding that child until there is at least something in the IEP that they can look at and will red flag if there are portions that are rejected on only your initial IEP.
So it's sort of like baking a cake. It's only as good as the ingredients that go into it. It's like a funnel. You pour everything in, what goes in, disability type, the impact of the disability, What is the child's present levels of performance? An easy way to think of it in many ways is think of what are the child's strengths, what are the needs, and from that, developing goals. Present level of performance, otherwise known as PLEP A or PLEP B, this is the alphabet soup. IDE requires that each IEP must include a statement of the child's present level of academic achievement, that's the reading, writing, math, science, as well as the functional performance. So the routines, that's PLEP B, the routines of activities around everyday living. And where do present levels come from? Well, they come from observations, they certainly come from testing, they come from anecdotal evidence or examples from teachers, and they also come from parents. Accommodations, within the PLEP, there should be a discussion and documentation within the IEP around the accommodations. And so what might some of the accommodations be when we're thinking specifically around CVI? And so now, and I really want to attribute much of this work to Ellen Maisel, who in many ways was a mentor to me as a new teacher. But we're going to go through the 10 characteristics and talk about what some of the potential accommodations might be included. So in regards to color, state within the IEP, what is the best color? Clarify to the team the understanding around why simple is better, why maybe just one or two colors, and how you're going to use color. Visual complexity, talking about dimming of the lights, close visual presentation versus distance, simple and not complex in backgrounds, and that goes back to the environment again. Auditory complexity, we know that children with CVI oftentimes have a difficult time using two senses at once, and so describe how reducing the competing audio stimuli, using one sense at a time with a quiet environment. Positioning the body. If kids are, one thing that I always remembered was if I was working with a student who was working really hard on sitting, they weren't able to do both at the same time. Again, it's using more than, it's that complexity. So solid seating, feet on the ground, good for any kid, but that sense of being grounded and supporting of a child's core. Movement. Sometimes we use materials that look like they have movement, like mylar and whatnot. Sometimes kids bring movement to the looking, and it's not necessarily always the materials, but a statement in there as to why that's important. Latency, knowing again, and Ellen talked about this, what is the wait time? What does it look like? This, I have to tell you, is one thing that's really hard for educators to do, wait. We just want to jump in there and get our hands on it, change it up really quick, and sometimes if you just wait, the child will attend, and then knowing how long that is and what the implications are for a classroom. Visual fields. Is there a particular visual field that's better? So working off of what's better. The right side is better than working for the right, using materials that are familiar. Lighting. Kids who are spinning and light gazing. Using light to our advantage where we're bringing light to the materials in order to elicit a visual response. Distance. We know that the picture becomes more complex when we add distance, and so helping the team really understand that. Novelty. Using materials that are familiar. And when new activities are presented to children, if you can pair things that are familiar and help kind of bridge that gap. I like what Ellen talked about pulling back those supports when the child has made gains. And I think as a field, that's something that we certainly could do a better job of. Visual motor. Describe this idea that sometimes children look away and reach. I can't tell you how many times I've heard a general ed teacher say, all eyes on me, all eyes on me. It's like my worst thing you can hear as a TBI. Or in any visual condition, you're working with a kid. We were working with a child at one point who had nystagmus, and she had kind of this end gaze, and she would get up in the front of the room and say, all eyes on me, all eyes on me. It took a lot of education to the teachers and staff to sort of help them understand that she's actually doing what she needs to do to lay her eyes on you. It doesn't look necessarily like what it might look like for everyone else. And then the interventions, and all of these interventions should be presented to children all the time and throughout all parts of their day. kids make gains. If I'm coming in as a teacher for an hour a day, and that's the only time we do that work, that child is not going to make gains. And so here are some just examples of phase one goals. You know, phase one, and Ellen spoke about this again, building, this is about learning to look. So building stable visual function. And I can't read this sideways. So Joey will increase his use of functional vision, in functional academics, self-help, and leisure. And then some of the criteria around that. Again, phase two, starting to combine vision with function. In phase three, Alice will refine her visual skills in near and distance, so using vision for learning. And then the last couple things I'm going to show you, yes?
Should there be, that seems yes, no, and once you do it once, you could technically say it's been, should there be a percentage?
Oh yeah, they should. It should be
Okay.
much more measurable than how I've written it there, definitely. And not only they should be measurable, but they should be attainable within a year. And that's where the progress reports come. So if you're getting progress reports as a parent that say at the end, is the child going to meet the goal by the end of the IEP marking period, and it's no, then I would suggest that the team should reconvene to develop goals that can be attained within that year. Things to consider, service delivery. Interesting, I talked to several teachers as I put this up there. This is not a one-size-fits-all. Service delivery is always a team decision, but several teachers that I consulted very much said that phase one and phase two is direct and consult. Lots and lots of consult, and Ellen and I talked about that as well, and we're on the same page. And phase three oftentimes can be just consult. But again, it's a team decision. And absolutely, best practices, there should be an in-service at the beginning of the school year. We write that in under additional information so that it's actually part of the IEP. And the in-service should include parents. I think when kids move to school, very oftentimes we just think it's just about school, but it's very explicit in the IEP when it talks about consult at the top that it includes parents as well. And that is the end of my presentation.